Hey everybody, Joel Wanasek here with Unstoppable Recording Machine, and today I wanted to talk about what I consider kind of the second part to my very basic intro to compression. And in the last video, we talked about the controls of a compressor, how it works, what it does, and how to kind of hear it and dial it in. So I wanted to expand on that and talk about limiting for a second in particular, because limiting is such a powerful tool in mixing, especially when you're doing modern, aggressive sounding records. And a good way to think about what a limiter does, so it's a really high ratio compressor, and a lot of hard limiters, and we use the word hard in limiting to mean it kind of just smashes everything. So for example, if you follow my mouse and you look at the track here, let me see the crash, I'm gonna zoom in on it. If you were to take my mouse and if I set the threshold here on the limiter, it would kind of take everything above the line I'm drawing here with the mouse and kind of smash it down if that's where my threshold is. So everything's kind of equal. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, why would I want to do that? And the answer is limiting is a very great way to make things sound aggressive and in your face and control dynamics, in which you can then add in later with automation. So for example, in a modern metal mix or a modern EDM like dubstep or anything that's aggressive, big room, whatever, where the sound is super aggressive, limiting allows you to really dig into your sounds and give them a very upfront sound. So one of the things, aside from compression, first stage is kind of controlling dynamics. The next one is creating density in sound. And after that is movement. And I don't want to confuse you. If you want to get into hearing movement and learning how to use that, I highly recommend subscribing to URM, Unstoppable Recording Machine Enhanced. We have a great thing here I've done on hearing compression and how to hear it and use movement in your songs, and it's way more advanced. But for our sakes here on YouTube, I'm doing something very introductory to help some of you out that are kind of just starting out in audio and mixing, just understand the basics. So a good way to think about limiting is that limiting can create density in sounds. And density is when you aggressively compress something with a limiter, and the sonic characteristics of the limiter take the sound and not only like pack in all the transients and make the sound not only denser physically on the screen. So if you look at this sound, for example, the guitar versus the drums has a lot of transients up here. You come around the guitar is a much denser sound. It's more compressed. It's more, and I guess that's what distortion technically is. It's compression and things like that. It's stuff like that. So density is packing in transients and bringing them closer and adding like tone and harmonic saturation and things and all the cool stuff that happens naturally. So again, like I said, why would we want to use that? Well, let's hear it in action, and let me just show you what limiters can do. Now, let's just grab this overhead here. Crash left. Now, you might be listening to this and you might be like, okay, the snare is extremely loud. Maybe you don't want all that snare in your overheads, or maybe you do, but let's just pretend that you didn't in your mix. And that one crash may be super loud compared to the other cymbal that he's playing. So let's say we want to equalize the dynamics. So you can open up a limiter, and I'm just going to grab Waves L1 here. The reason I'm going to do L1, and you can use any limiter, is because L1 is a very simple to use format, meaning threshold, out ceiling, and release. You don't get to touch the attack time, and most of the time you don't need to think about the release. So because this is a basic introductory video, we're not even going to play with the release. Let's ignore that and pretend that that doesn't exist and just focus on two controls. The threshold, meaning how much compression, or I should say limiting, we're applying to the signal, and the out. So let's look at it on the meters here when I hit play. You can see all that snare transient popping up here over, I want to say around -8 to 10, kind of where I have my mouse. So let's say, what happens if we take this, and I'm going to grab the link. I'll bring the threshold down first. You might have noticed the sound getting louder, so I'm going to bring the sound down. Now L1 allows us to link this and bring this down together. Okay. So what just happened? Now, I took the threshold down, and basically everything that goes over this bar gets smashed out to the level that is at that bar. Okay, so basically nothing can cross this threshold. Excuse my English today. It's kind of like the gatekeeper. It's like the part in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf doesn't let the Balrog pass. He's like, you shall not pass. You shall not pass! So nothing gets past this gate here. This is like Gandalf holding the bridge. And if you listen carefully to the sound, you're going to hear a lot of transient in the snare, and then you're going to hear it disappear. You're also going to hear this first crash cymbal come down significantly in volume. So what happened to our sound now? It became extremely consistent across the performance. So now nothing is poking out and there's not a lot of transients. So you might be wondering, okay, great. So you completely destroyed all the dynamics, Joel. Why would I want to use that in a mix? Well, like I said, packing in density can make things sound really aggressive. So let me grab a bass guitar here to show you that in action. So this bass is actually a little bit compressed, it looks like. So if I go here and I throw in my L1 and I smash this bass into oblivion, have a listen to what happens. I've got a little bit over smash because you can kind of hear some of the mutes and stuff, or the noise in between the performance pick up a little bit too aggressively, but the bass gets extremely aggressive and in your face, and it sounds really big. And what's happening is we are limiting all of the bottom end, so the bass frequency response across the performance. Now, this guy's obviously a very good player, but if we had a poor player where they would pick harder and then softer, we are averaging out the performance to be more consistent, which is going to give you more perceived size and volume in a mix and a little bit of aggression, like I said, density. So if I was setting this, I would dig this in a little bit and try to find a space where I'm not really, where this muted part here where he kind of just pauses doesn't get brought up too much. So maybe around here is instead of here. Listen to it. Too much noise. So it's a kind of a trade-off. It's how much aggression do you want in the sound versus how clean it is. So, another way you could get around that if you wanted this to be really aggressive is if you were recording this, you could go in and you could edit this out and just tighten it up. In the mix, it would sound like this. Shouldn't really call that a mix. That's more of just faders. But you get the point and understand. Okay, so let's see what it does on a guitar here. And I'm going to look at some of the guitar parts here. Let me see what we got. All right, we got some tapping. Let me solo this out and unlink this. Let's hear this. So maybe we want that to be a little bit more consistent, to cut through and sound more aggressive in the mix. Because, again, when you create density, if you want to think about mixing in terms of like parking spaces, if we've got 10 parking spaces available on a lot and we need to fit 2 semis, 4 compact cars, a motorcycle or 3, and maybe a couple SUVs in that, it's going to be really, really, really complicated. But by creating density in sounds, it allows us to cut down the size of the cars by, let's say, half, so you can fit more of them in the parking lot. I think that's a pretty good analogy for what we're doing here. So maybe I want to take this tapping lead and take out some of the dynamics and make it denser. So you can hear how the limiter makes that really, really dense, and in a mix, it would be a lot easier for it to cut through. Let me see if I can get it. I'm going to mute some of this other stuff just so we can hear this better. Now I have it so limited it almost sounds glassy. You can hear that it's adding some saturation and things like that. And you may or may not like that tone, but you can hear what it does. Kind of gives it a little bit more of a creamier sound, and you can kind of hear the notes in between, the actual notes and the attacks on the notes a little bit more clear because there's less transient. Again, you may or may not like that sound when you're mixing, but it's important if we're talking about understanding compression and what it does and limiting to see where people may use that. Okay, so another place that people use limiting could be guitars. And a good way to think about guitars and limiting, again, is parking spaces. So this is already extremely distorted, heavy guitar here. And by doing this, we're just going to create a little bit of density. And basically, if we were mixing it, this would give us just a little bit more headroom in the song. Think about it like that. So it's a little bit punchier, and then when I put the limiter on, it makes it less punchy because we're knocking off all the transient, but the trade-off is that we're getting more density. And again, it depends on what you're going for. In a band here like Seos and in the session that I have up, I probably wouldn't do that, and I really probably wouldn't limit the guitars, but it's basically, like I said, we're just demonstrating. Now, if we look at a vocal here, just like when we introduce compression, limiting is a great way to get vocals to sound really aggressive in your face. So let's look at the performance. So if I wanted this vocal to really be up front in the mix and be really consistent, I would smash it. Who holds a silver string, lost in a stagnant motion, when you run away, whoever changes shape. Who holds a silver string, lost in a stagnant motion, when you run away. You can hear that makes the vocal super consistent. So a lot of mixers that mix active rock, metal music, electronic music, and pop are very, very aggressive with their limiting because, like I said, it allows them to create density. So hopefully this has helped you hear what it does and how you might want to use it. And it's really up to you, obviously, in your own mixes to decide how much compression you like, what sounds good to your ear, and develop your own sound. But a really good way to kind of hear compression, aside from what I showed you in the last video, is to just take a limiter and throw it on a bunch of tracks and see what things sound like crushed. For example, let's grab this room and let's limit the crap out of it and see what it sounds like. So by itself, all right, smash it. So you see, by destroying it, it sounds like a bigger sounding room and it's more ambient, which you may want on your room mics, you may not. So it's killing the transient and bringing up the body and making the sound more dense. You're gonna get ambience and you're gonna trade off punch for ambience. So again, it depends on your mixing goal and what you wanna do. But like I said, the way to think about using limiters in a mix is really thinking about parking spaces and just trying to get the amount of vehicles that you have in the mix. So if each track is a vehicle, to fit into the lot nice and easy so everyone can get in and everyone can get out. Meaning in terms of mixing, that would be like being able to hear every instrument against themselves. So that is a basic introduction here to limiting. Hopefully that helps you understand it better. Let me know how you're using limiting in your own mixes or where you're struggling with. Like I said, it's very easy as a beginner to come in and hear limiting and learn how to use it and see how it impacts your mix. Because a lot of times, a lot of limiters are very simple. There's usually only two controls. That's threshold and makeup gain. So, that's a really good way to start learning to hear compression as well, is just throw limiters on everything, experiment, see how it sounds, and you can always back off. You can try smashing things, do a mix and smash everything and then see what it sounds like. It'll probably sound really small and weird. And then do a mix where you do the limiters maybe half as much, and then take a mix where the limiter is just slightly on and giving you a little bit of density, and just see it, compare it, listen. That's what this stuff is about. That's how you get better at this. The more you practice, the more songs that you mix, and the more that time that you spend using and listening to these tools and thinking how they affect the whole picture, as well as the source individually, that's how you're going to get better at mixing. So if you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe to our channel for lots of more great in-depth mixing videos. Thank you very much, and hopefully this helps you.